prudent to like at least give ourselves a brief introduction of like who we are, even though like they can see us? Like,
yeah.
So yeah, go ahead.
Well, okay. I mean, you know, I'm Omeed, and this is Alec. We're from Stereoscope Studios. I don't know if I should be looking at you when I'm saying this because you know this already, or looking at a lens.
You can tell we're behind the camera usually.
Yeah, we are usually behind the camera. But yeah, we're Alec and Omeed from Stereoscope Studios, and you know, we've been getting a lot of interest and conversations starting around topics of race and you know, minority-owned businesses lately, and we've been kind of not super silent in our own realms, but silent as a company on this. Besides uploading some footage of a protest that I attended in Towson recently, but you know, we haven't usually this is not our thing to discuss, but we felt that based on a lot of these conversations and a lot of what we've been seeing in the world, and we don't see our viewpoints necessarily represented in the conversations, and we thought, hey, we have a platform, even though it might be small, right? And we always talk about stuff like this. We do. With our friends, with each other. We might as well see what this is like and actually have a conversation.
At the very least for posterity.
Yeah, for ourselves, and for hopefully for people who might be interested in. Full disclosure, we are mixed race people. Yes.
If you couldn't catch.
Yeah. I am. I don't really know what race you would count me as, but I mean, my mother's white. My father is brown. He's from Iran, so I have that Middle Eastern heritage that I see the world through. Half the world through. One eye is Middle Eastern, the other one's white.
Yeah,
and then
it's tricky, right? Yeah. Tricky. No, I'm half white, and the assumption based off of my characteristics and my mother's preference for men, I am most likely half black. So we're just running with that. I've been running with that my whole life.
We don't know, but I
don't know for sure.
Half black.
I didn't do one of those. I should do one of those like cotton swab DNA things. I've never done it.
Yeah, I mean, you could. The only thing I'll say about that is I had them delete my DNA recently from their data systems because I'm a little concerned.
Yes.
Them having my DNA and they could use it.
They're gonna make Omeed clones.
Yes. Which I guess is not the worst thing in the world. So maybe
as long as that's the one that does the day job, right?
What do you mean?
Your clone, it does your day job.
Oh, so it does my day job, and I can just...
it makes the money. See, like that's it.
That's the thing, though. Like,
I can't say that.
When the we'll just glide right past that.
Yeah, I'm just gonna glide right past it. It's cool.
When COVID hit and I started working from home, I mean, it wasn't. The day job became less of a stressor in my life.
Same. Yeah.
So, who knows if the second wave comes up, I'll have this same gig where I'm working from home and
How dare you? There's like so many people that don't have work, and you're just like, second wave makes me like...
I feel like an asshole right now. You're absolutely right.
No, it's fine.
No,
like,
it's not fine.
You count your blessings, man. You got to acknowledge your blessings.
I acknowledge my privilege.
Oh my god.
Shit. I'm becoming alt-right real fast. Hold on.
No. Nah, it's just okay, so another backstory element for me, because you will hear a lot of like groaning from me on coded language specifically. And the reason for that is because I actually, for a good portion of my life, grew up in they would contest this, but I grew up in a religious cult. So like you know, there's a lot about like, especially after being out of it and doing some research into how cults work and brainwashing in particular, and even like there's some hypnotism tactics that are in a lot of things, surprisingly enough. Like we were talking the other night about like ASMR, and I'm like, there's actually some like there's actually some hypnotic elements to that too if you look into it. But like I'm really for most people I would be what is considered hypersensitive to stuff like coded language or any sort of like thought control, information control, any sort of tactics like that.
And that's coming from a perspective of a religious background where you were heavily, I mean, some would say indoctrinated from very early age.
Yeah.
And then stepping away from that, I think it's been 5 years?
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, almost 5 years since you broke away. I remember it was 2015. When you were excommunicated or disfellowshipped.
Yeah.
From the church that you were. Yeah. I don't know if you want to get into that too much, but you've had some time away from it and you've developed thoughts away from that. And so you've been able to recognize patterns in language, patterns in actions, what people will do to corral and keep people on their side,
Yes.
or guilt people into their side, or
just, condition thoughts. Like it's a thing where it's so, if you do it right, you can create a system that is so subtle, a culture that is so subtly, it's so subtle in its way of controlling you that, like, it's not doing it after a certain point. You're doing it to yourself. Like, and that's an extremely effective way of controlling people, is to condition their minds to the point to where they automatically reject anything that doesn't support what you want them to support.
right.
And so when I hear coded language, it, like, that's the real thing that where he's like, I got to check my privilege. Like, to me, checking your privilege is a form of coded language because of how it is used. And so, like, it's not that I think that people don't have privileges or that these things shouldn't be acknowledged. It's more like I'm more groaning at the
intention
of the phrase. Right.
Yeah, it's not about the phrase itself so much as
Right.
about who's saying it and what they mean by it. And so, to get back on track, we obviously, in this heavily political climate that we're in right now,
Political cults.
and all these disasters that have been happening, COVID, and then, the death of George Floyd, a lot of people are angry, a lot of people are suffering, and
Angry, rightfully so, in
Of
a lot of
course.
these cases. Yeah.
of course. And so going back to what we were saying, us being who we are and having the backgrounds that we do, and the conversations that we have, we don't see that reflected in the major media sphere, essentially, the perspectives of, I don't want to, like, say that we are the logical, know what, but it's more of like a, not tame, but it's just more of like a take a step back, and it's not emotional.
It's stoic.
It's sure.
It's kind of like you take a stoicism approach to trying to assess this situation.
Solve this issue.
Yeah.
And these issues, I'd
Yeah.
say. And because we don't see that represented in media, we don't see it represented in our feeds, we wanted to add to the noise, as it were.
Yeah, sounds great.
And maybe have some other perspective that's maybe less emotional, but coming from a place of real thought and a real heart as well, in trying to solve
course.
issues and trying to get people who are essentially on the same side together,
Right.
to fight against real enemies and real people who are using everyone against each other.
And attacking the problems, the core problems at play here. Because, like, I know I think when we first had our original conversation about this before we decided to do this, that started from me kind of, I remember bringing up that, it felt like there wasn't a guiding principle involved in all of this. Like, there wasn't a guiding philosophy. There isn't really, like, a solid leadership structure. You have a bunch of different factions with a bunch of different ideologies that are similar. They are similar, but they are not the same. Like, working together and coalescing into this thing that, like, ultimately does not mix well. Like, it's something that cannot be maintained for very long because these elements do not mix well together.
Okay. Can you break down a little bit?
Sure. So, on one side, one section that you have is obviously there, like, this whole scenario this powder keg was set off by the video of George Floyd being killed by a group of police officers, but one police officer primarily. And no one I have talked to, just regardless of background, like, if they've watched the video all the way through, no one I've talked to has really ever contested that was a wrong, that was clearly unjustified. It was an unjust way of handling that situation, and it resulted in someone's death, and that is an outrage. That's something that should be addressed. So you have, from that point right there, you have two separate splinters that occur already. So you have people that are recognizing this primarily as a police brutality issue, and then you have a side that, which is not, it's not unheard of. It's very common when these sorts of things happen in recent years. You have the side of it that views this from the lens of a racialized police brutality issue. So you already have two separate factions there. Those two can necessarily get along. That's possible. Then you have other political factions that have, you have the media, which is its own third thing that is just reporting sensational things because it makes them money. Like I know there's a lot of conspiracy theorists out there that like, oh, it's all this like weird Illuminati media nonsense, but like for me, I just see people being greedy. Like they know what makes money, they know what gets clicks, so that's what they're gonna do. I feel like that's the core guiding principle. Maybe there's definitely some bias there left and right, but like whatever.
Well, I feel like there's influence involved
Sure.
from people who actually hold some semblance of power. People we might not even know their names, but definitely people who are politicians. You know, when you're talking about the 24-hour news cycle and those stations like Fox or MSNBC, how they generally take talking points from their respective parties,
right?
And you know, you could see it every day. The same pundits will say the same exact phrases, depending on which party they're representing,
right?
So besides that,
yes,
I mean that's greed. That goes into that whole thing of greed and you know, capitalism, business be business kind of thing,
right?
It's a mix, but yes, I understand what you're saying.
And then so you have that already just stirring the pot. Like that's inherently going to stir the pot wherever it can, because sensation, like if it bleeds, it leads, as the phrase goes. And then you have these, aside from that, you have these political factions, and you know, you have groups like Antifa, you have these other political factions that are like much more on the socialism spectrum that are jumping on to these scenarios and these movements and this outrage, because they definitely, like, I mean, maybe I'm you know, giving some malintent here, but they see these events as opportunities to push what they want to happen from a political side. You know, it's, if, you know, one of the things that has birthed from this, and there's a lot of debate happening about it, is, you know, the hashtag defund police and like this very anti-police rhetoric that's happening right now. That is something that, you know, these different factions can agree on, but why they're agreeing on them are different. And when you develop a movement, like what I'm saying is like you have this situation where you're trying to develop this coalition, and they all right now agree on the same idea. Like they want to accomplish the same thing, but they're not really laying out why and what's the follow-up. Like right now the focal point is just like police need to, like, you have some people, and it's degrees. You have some people that are like, the police need to be regulated, there needs to be an examination done. There's some people that are like, you need to start pulling money out of the police and putting it into other things and other services. And then there's people that are just like, police gone, let's make our own separate.
Police are bad. Yeah.
Like you have Chaz in Seattle. Right. Like you have this whole thing where they're like, we want to be separate from America and have our own little faction. And so like there's this spectrum that's already starting to exist and stratify, because even though they all agree that something needs to be done, and the thing that sparked this is the same thing that they agree is outrageous and something to be addressed, the reasons why they're going into this fight are different. And eventually
the solutions they have are different.
Right. Yes.
Or they don't have solutions and they're trying things out.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, and the only reason that that's happening is because a lot of these, it's either through lack of organization or surreptitious organization by design for some of these factions, in my opinion. And they're either intentionally not stating like clearly and comprehensively what their goals are, what they're trying to actually accomplish long term, or they don't have long term goals. They're just reacting. And so this will inevitably implode on itself in its current state, is how I see it. And that's kind of where this came from. And I'm like, you know, this is not how you achieve solutions. You can't achieve real, substantial, meaningful solutions to the problems that we all agree, well, at least most of us, the two of us at the very least can agree, need to be addressed. And not just with the George Floyd situation, but like with our nation as a whole, with our history, with our culture. Like there are underlying issues here that are boiling up to the surface that we keep dancing around, but like never fully address. Yeah,
everything's coming up right now.
Right.
People are just trying things. I don't know. It just feels very disorganized, and not super well thought out in terms of the solutions that are being proposed, and some of the solutions that are actually being implemented by those in power in local municipalities around the country. You know, defunding police. It's a very good, awesome slogan, especially for how easy it is to say. But what are the implications of that? what is the plan? Where's that money going? It's just there are ideas that are being presented like we'll take the money out of the police and we'll put it into other services, and those services will take care of other things. And that sounds great, but then we never you never really hear about, okay, so what happens to the police force at that point? They are underfunded at that point in terms of what they were funded at. And so they're making less money for their officers. They're making less money for training. That's going to inevitably, in my head, lead to worse quality officers.
Yes.
Who are even more undertrained.
Yes.
I think right now the average training cycle is 3 months for an
Something
officer.
like that, yeah.
Whereas, we have soldiers who are training for 6 months or more. Marines who train for months and months and months.
And you need a 4-year degree just to pour a cup of coffee in the private sector. So it's like,
well, essentially, but we need better quality police. I think. I'm not opposed to having other services that go
be ramped up. Yeah.
Does a police officer need to be aware of every single type of thing that they get called on?
No.
Right now, no. But if we want to change how the police work, we need better police officers. We need better trained police forces.
And these are all great, general ideas.
That costs money.
That costs money. These are all great general ideas that cost money. But the devil, as they say, is in the details. And the issue that I have fundamentally is that you have all of these factions can agree that the current bureaucracy, our current system, they all have this rhetoric of our current system is not serving us, right? But if you don't sit down and work out your solution, a comprehensive plan, have something that you can sell to not only the bureaucracy of this system, but to other people to achieve more allies, to get a bigger movement going, because now you have a plan. Because a lot of people, you can criticize them however you want. You can try and cudgel them with guilt or whatever. But a lot of people aren't going to back a very aggressive, whether that's emotional or physical, a very aggressive in its rhetoric movement.
It only has legs for so long.
Right, when it doesn't have a real plan. When you don't see where it's going.
The George Floyd incident is incredible ammunition for a movement like this. It'll last a while, and it's got a lot of people angry, and it exposed a lot of people who wouldn't really give these sort of incidents more of the time of day, I guess.
It was a perfect storm.
They wouldn't acknowledge it as much.
Everybody was stuck at home.
Everyone is just that is wrong. That is absolutely wrong. What's going on in our country? If this is, and then the protests afterwards and how they were dealt with, and all the incredible videos that came out from how the police handled seemingly peaceful protests.
Jeez.
In most cases, people in their front yards or their front doors looking at police walking through there, and then they got shot at by, it's just that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Something needs to change. And so that defund and all that stuff comes from that. But again, it's all based on emotion.
It's all reactive.
It's I don't like that thing. Let's get rid of it. Oh, I don't like that thing. Let's make it weaker. But we never have the conversation after that. It's what does that mean to make something weaker that is there? I mean, I would argue that it's there and it's serving its purpose as intended, not protecting people per se, but protecting people above.
Right. It's protecting the people that it's supposed to protect.
But how do we make that system work for the people that we believe it should be protecting?
The rest of us.
Everyone. Yeah. Yes. And to me, defunding that is not the right way. And throwing money at it is not the right way either alone.
Right.
You have to throw money at something that, again, with a plan as to how you're going to make it better. Are we going to hire better quality officers? Okay, that's going to require more money for their pensions, more money for their salaries, more money for their training, all that stuff, just extra money.
And my big point is you don't want to leave that planning up to the bureaucracy.
No, you have to present that.
Uh-oh. Is that just the screen? What did it do?
I don't know. Now one of our adapters for a battery went down midway through our conversation.
Yeah.
Just like we intended and planned. So we're good. Everything's working.
This is planned chaos.
So, getting back into it.
So I think where we left off. I was talking about how the decisions of how to execute these ideas and like what processes we use for all of these. The broader ideas that are being presented should not be left up to the bureaucracy of our current system.
Because that's the same system that set it up in the first place.
Right.
Also, so why should we trust them to
from
fix
from that philosophical perspective?
Totally understand.
Right, yeah.
Totally understand that.
And so that means that these plans, these philosophies, these ideas need to be worked out by the groups that want to put them forward. And the problem with that I see is like when this all first started happening, the protests and even some of the rioting that occurred alongside the initial protests. One of the things that I was seeing is like, you know, in response to the inevitable criticism that comes from saying like, oh, you can't riot, you're not supposed to do this, destroying property, yada yada yada, is that, you know, in the American Revolution, right, at the beginning of it, like it's the Boston Tea Party, they went in and they broke some shit, like they like this is a justified form. And there is a key difference, however, from a historical perspective to like those two events, like that and what is happening now, and that is that before that occurred, there were people who, for better or for worse, and, you know, historically imperfect people, as we all can acknowledge, they sat down and actually like thought through what they were doing, and they deliberated amongst themselves before an action was taken. They deliberated like what they wanted to do, why they were doing it, and what came next. Like they were willing to fight a war over but before they could fight that war, they had to determine exactly what they were fighting for. Otherwise, they were inevitably going to lose, and they understood that. So what I'm saying is like the main thing that I'm missing from what I'm hearing, what I'm seeing about all of these movements and the reactions to these events that are occurring is like, who is the group? Who is the leader? Who is the group of leaders? Who are the thoughts? Like the people that are tasked with thinking through these things for these movements on the behalf of these protests. And where are their essentially like their Declaration of Independence, their Bill of Rights? Like, where are those things? Like, because without those, it's not even like I don't want to back these ideas. It's more, I don't see it succeeding long term because there's no plan. Like, and for me personally, and this is where our particular perspectives come in, I feel like in this issue, I don't think that the proposed plans actually fix the problem. I think that these are attacking symptoms of the problem, and the problem is a lot bigger than that.
The problem goes deeper, and exactly, these are symptoms. You won't be able to fix an issue just by taking care of those alone.
Of course not.
Yeah.
And, you know, the core problem that I think everybody can agree upon to some degree is that there is a history of racism and racial violence and bigotry and whatnot in our country, in this empire. And that has had, I mean, to be completely fair, it's only recent in like the past, generation, half a generation, more or less, maybe almost a full generation, where like from a structural standpoint, from a legal standpoint, like those things have been more or less equality under the law on paper has been achieved for the most part. And there's a lot of points where you can contest that, sure. But slavery has been abolished. Jim Crow era is gone. Like, we had the civil rights movement that had a lot of sweeping changes that came along with it that has, compared to before that point, greatly bettered the lives of everyone, not just people of color, not just like I personally believe we have a better society when people are given equal opportunity to be of use to said society, really, and use to themselves. So like, and I think that anybody who disagrees with that is kind of dumb. I'm willing to take that strong stance.
Your opinion, man.
I know, right? It's like,
but I do agree.
Right.
On the record.
And it's like, but how do you address? Because racism at its core is a way of thinking. It's a mental framework, right?
Yeah.
And so you don't defeat racism, you don't defeat a mental framework with policy. You don't defeat a mental framework with, catchy hashtags and restructuring institutions in a society. Like you haven't done anything to address the framework. And honestly, what I personally, my personal opinion on this is that actually a lot of the ways that these changes, this rhetoric, these movements are being carried out, the way that people are talking about this, you're actually not addressing the framework. You're not damaging the framework at all. You're enforcing it.
You're making it stronger.
You're making it stronger.
You're making, by enacting policies that give government more power over the day-to-day activities of human beings in this country. They have more weapons to use against you in the future. They can use those same laws that you're enacting to basically get their way when your way doesn't suit their needs anymore.
Right.
I know that's a fairly vague overview, but the more power that a government has, the more it can exercise it over you. The less power a government has within reason,
right,
the more freedoms that you retain as an individual.
Yes.
And that's not to say that the government should have no power.
Obviously not.
There is a balance, just like anything else.
Right.
But to give away more and more of our freedoms for their power in order to, be like, hey, Dad, take care of, this for me. Hey, Dad, do this. Essentially, daddy government.
Or as some would like to say, Big Brother.
Do this for me. Take care of this for me. Make sure that I don't feel this emotion. Make sure that I'm not offended by this. You're just walling yourself in more and more and more into a system.
The way I've always said it is when you fashion a weapon, you have to be prepared for that weapon to be used against you. That's what making a weapon does.
That's exactly what's going on.
And I actually
government
think it's
is a tool.
Yes, and I think it's beyond government though. I think it's actually more fundamental and deeper. It's a psychological thing because essentially the way that this got started, all of these problems, this bloody history that we have, that we've literally fought a civil war over, started because at some point someone looked at someone from Africa, a black person, right, and said, you are, based off of what I can visually see, the fact that you are physically manifesting with different qualities than I am, that you are separate from me in my head, I'm putting you in a different category in my head, and I have chosen to make you lesser than me based off of that categorization. And that enables me to do all sorts of horrible things to you. It's also the same thing that happened from a mental framework. It's the same thing that happened with Germany in the 40s. That same mental framework is what allowed them to put Jews in concentration camps. That's where that comes from. When you can separate an individual or a group of individuals into a category that is not one that you sit in, and you then can make that category negative as a whole or less than as a whole, you can you can rationalize anything at that point.
And we've seen it.
Yeah,
we've seen it throughout history.
It's constantly in history. And what I'm seeing right now is there is a lot of push to, and I know it's well-meaning. I'm not trying to say that it's this horrible, terrible idea. I understand the reaction. I understand where it comes from. And honestly, I had similar reactions myself, over the years. Where what is happening now is, instead of going, that mental framework is wrong, and we need to get rid of that mental framework, you are now co-opting that framework, and instead you want to weaponize that framework to benefit you. You are saying I need to be amplified because where before it was, I'm black and therefore I'm lesser than you. It is now, I am black and therefore I need to be amplified and benefited, and I need my own things. I need these, this concept of trying to make up for history reinforces the mental framework that enslaved you in the first place. And the only way to actually end this saga of this cycle, rather, of racism from that perspective, not from an institutional perspective, but in the minds of people, because that's where I feel this battle actually is. The real battle exists in the minds of people. You have to get them to stop using the framework of their oppressors. Because if you are putting yourself if you're internalizing that you are in a different category from someone else, you are fashioning, like you are adopting that framework. You are taking it on. And I don't think you can ever beat this history if you're using that framework. That's my personal perspective. I think that, if you want to really come to a solution where, we have a society that is actually better and we don't just keep doing this dance, the way that we think about each other needs to change.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so what specifically would you recommend how you remove yourself? Like, what does that look like, practically speaking?
Okay.
Removing yourself from that mindset. Moving, because it's everyone probably who has that mindset.
Yes. No, we all have it. And it's a difficult road. That is the most difficult path. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying this as though I'm assuming it's easy to do. Mm-hmm. But the way that generally works is like it's one of these things where you have to be able to like walk and chew gum at the same time mentally, where it's like, I have to, because one of the things that I know for me personally is I don't view myself. I mean, I understand that I don't personally view myself as a black man. And this has come up in many of relationships of mine, friendships, romantic ones, where people don't really understand why or how I've arrived at that. And the knee-jerk reaction is an assumption that like either I think that there's something wrong with identifying as a black man, or that it's more of like I feel like the world, like I live in a la la land where like I don't acknowledge that other people see me that way, like, which is inherently just untrue. I view myself as an individual first. Like, mm-hmm. I view myself and others around me as individuals first. And honestly, my racial makeup or ethnic makeup, whatever you want to call it, doesn't rank very high in how I assess myself and how I judge myself. Like, yes, I have a history. Yes, my family has a history. Yes, we all have these cultural influences that come into making us who we are. I'm not saying that you just pretend like that doesn't exist. And I have my own personal history, my own personal experiences with people that has shaped the way I see the world, as we kind of talked about in the beginning here. Mm-hmm. And so the thing is that I can simultaneously, it's difficult, but you can simultaneously acknowledge that, like, yes, I live in a world that sees me as a black man and sometimes that's beneficial to me, and other times it's very detrimental mm-hmm. and outright dangerous. And so even though I understand that, I don't see myself that way because I don't want a society that I disagree with on that particular concept to dictate to me how I see myself. Right?
Right.
And so what that results in is kind of this being of two minds right now, because I don't live in a world that is conducive to how I think. Where I have to simultaneously acknowledge to myself that, like, I'm an individual. I am not going to, when I'm experiencing my life, I'm going to give everybody the benefit of the doubt, like I always do. And I'm going to say, like, okay, this individual is interacting with me in this manner, not because I am black or mixed or whatever, right? Until it becomes very clear that that is what they're doing. Like,
your first interaction is based off of the interaction itself.
Right.
Like, this person that I'm interacting with,
mm-hmm.
you gauge it from there.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how are they as an individual? Are they treating me like an asshole?
Right.
You know? And then you can go further, like, are they treating me badly because of, just based on the context of whatever you're dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
But it always starts with, who is this person I'm working with right now or dealing with right now?
Mm-hmm.
And who are they at their core?
Right.
As an individual, because everyone's different. I mean, mm-hmm. This is not a unique perspective to have. Everyone has their own perspective on the world, and they have their own lived histories
mm-hmm.
that have shaped them into who they are today. And they have their own opinions, and they have everything is completely different. The only things that keep groups together essentially are, these frameworks,
mm-hmm.
Which are valid in some sense, but they're not the only thing that define a person.
Right.
Whether it's your sexual identity, whether it's your race,
mm-hmm.
That is a big part of who you are, but it's not the only thing.
But there are also things that we don't choose.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's the thing. I didn't choose to be the racial makeup that I am. And I don't believe that people choose their sexuality either. Like, you like what you like.
You like what you like.
And so if I'm to believe that, which I think is, I mean, until I hear a really compelling evidence to the contrary, if I believe that, then I don't think that it's fair. And we understand when it's happening, like when it happens to me in a negative sense, when somebody is judging me harshly or treating me poorly because of those things, everyone instinctively, when that's happening to you, you feel that it's unfair. You feel that it's completely unjust. Yeah.
You didn't choose that role.
Right. And so it's like, if I didn't choose that and I know that it's unjust to treat me poorly based off of that, then I can't then turn around and go, I'm going to try and, I guess, co-opt this way of thinking and weaponizing it in my favor either, because that results in me being unfair to everyone else at the end of the day. And so... You
know what that's like to feel, I guess, threatened in that way.
Yes.
Based on something that you don't choose. So to turn it around and, for instance, this is what we're seeing sometimes, like right now. All police are bad.
Right.
Because of several incidents that we've seen displayed in front of us on TV and on YouTube, everything, of police acting absolutely horribly against who we see as innocent people who are protesting or just going about their daily lives.
Right.
And not bothering really anyone.
They're not a danger to anyone else in a lot of these cases.
So using that mindset of how the police are approaching these people who they see as a threat, we approach the police with the same mindset.
Right.
Of like, oh, you see us this way, we'll see you that way back.
And you're not helping the situation. You're accepting their framework. Like if
you've accepted the framework. That's exactly it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, I was talking with a friend of mine on this particular subject a few weeks ago, and she actually countered, well, like, okay, so how does that work in practice? Like, this whole framework concept that you have, how does that work in practice? Like, say you get pulled over by a cop on a traffic stop, and that cop is hostile. And I'm like, I'm glad you asked that question, because I've definitely been I've had that situation. I've actually had, not to go into my struggles, but like, I've had guns pulled on me because of clearly because of my race. Like, not by police officers either, by like random citizens before.
Yeah, you grew up in Florida, Virginia, a few places.
Yeah.
More southern than Maryland is.
Yeah.
Right.
And so, like, there's definitely some backwater places where, like, their framework is very hostile and suspicious of someone that looks like me. And so, how do you work within those situations? Like, and the thing is I broke it down for her. I said, well, okay, so I have a police officer who has pulled me over, and they're hostile. They're clearly hostile. They already got their hand on their weapon, because I've seen that happen before too, where they're ready to draw, like we're in a fucking Western shootout. Like, it's wild, and it's threatening. It's incredibly threatening,
of course,
and it's terrifying. Like, I'm not gonna sit here and pretend like, even though I can, still talk calmly to them, that my heart isn't like going nuts, because I know that I'm in a life or death situation right now. But instead of being reactive, like, this is what it takes, and it's tough. Instead of being reactive and being justifiably upset with them, justifiably indignant, does doing that increase my chances of survival in that scenario? No. And I'm not saying that you be completely compliant with cops all the time. Like, know your rights, know what you can do and cannot do. But, like, do the thing that's going to make you the most safe. And in my opinion, it's getting down to the heart of why the cop is acting that way towards me, right? And now the easy answer is because they're racist, right? That's the easy answer. But very few people, even the ones that are racist, think that they're racist. So going at them in that way is not, like, they're going to naturally pull back, be defensive. And the way that you beat racism isn't to just call somebody a racist and make them get defensive. The way that you beat racism is, from a mental standpoint, to show them that there is no difference. Like, there is no me versus you. There is an us. All right? Like, if I can put myself, instead of in the separate category that you're walking into the situation putting me in, if I can somehow move myself into your box where you see yourself, I win. Like, that is the safest place for me to be, is for you to see me as you. And so that, and it's something that I've learned through, like, different figures in history during the civil rights movement. But, like, in that specific scenario, I told her I had one instance where, like, it just so happened to be 90 degrees when this cop pulled me over in Virginia. Clearly hostile, clearly ready to like, if I made the one false move, clearly ready to start something. And, yeah, the first thing that came to mind, because it's really hot and it's humid. If you've ever been to Virginia when it's 90 degrees, it sucks. Like, one of the first things out of my mouth was like, I don't know how you are not dying underneath, like, what? You got like 2 layers of clothes and like Kevlar underneath there. Like, dude, you must be crazy sweating. Like, let me get my stuff here to you as quickly as possible, because I don't want you dying out here. You need to get back into your AC. Instantly hand off the gun. And the reason that worked is because I put myself in his box. I put myself where he's standing. Mm-hmm. Not because that was the fair and just thing for me to do. Not because of any other reason than I wanted him to de-escalate. I wanted him to see me as an ally and not as an opponent. Mm-hmm. Like, we're going to work through this traffic stop together. Like, I'm not against you, whatever. And I'm not saying that that's, and I'm not, don't get it twisted. I'm not saying that, like, that's going to work 100% of the time. There are going to be that asshole that is going to try and reassert that framework, and it's a battle. You're going to have to consistently stop them at every turn when they try to reassert like a me versus you framework and make it an us framework. Like, that's how you beat this mentality.
And it's unfortunate because no one should have to deal with that.
Right.
That's the problem with this whole... Like, yes. I see your argument and I understand it, but I can hear people just be like, mm-hmm. I shouldn't have to do that, though.
And they're absolutely right.
And they're absolutely right.
Yeah.
But I think our point overall is to combat racism or combat institutionalized racism, whatever you want to call it, with emotion or with reactionary ideas that aren't super well thought out. And if your goal is to end racism, or mm-hmm. at least to chip away at it in this country, which I think is a very noble goal, you have to have a plan, and you have to be the better person.
Yes.
You have to be the better person in every situation, even when it's as hard as that, and it's not always going to work.
I mean, that's something that I learned from the civil rights movement directly. Mm-hmm. The people that were the most successful. And the reason why this is so important to do is because what the civil rights movement did was it converted more people. It didn't, it was this interesting thing. And I mean, everybody can quote King and talk about his movements and X and talk about how he carried
mm-hmm.
out his side of the movement. But the thing that really gets me is the individual stories of like, and I know I've said this to you a few times, but like there's an interview that stuck with me, and it was done like, I want to say it was like either the 80s or like early 90s. It was an interview with a former KKK member in like this Midwest town. I don't remember all of the details, but I do remember that like this man was being interviewed and he left the KKK soon after the civil rights movement was over. And part of the reason that the main reason rather that he did this is because of this continued interaction with this black pastor in the town that they were in. And the fact that despite all of the things that they subjected this man and his family to, and the harassment and all of their attempts to goad him into reacting, the fact that the way that he reacted to them, the way that he didn't, one, accept their framework, he didn't react the way that they wanted him to react, and two, was reasserting a different idea, like breaking down their frame of mind to them in his simple actions. And the one that sticks with me is he had one particular story where they figured out that this pastor was eating lunch at a diner, or eating breakfast at a diner rather, and they figured out that he was there, so they were gonna all ride over there to harass him. And he was eating a cantaloupe as like an appetizer or whatever, and he has to cut it open, but it hasn't been cut open yet. Mm-hmm. And the head of this group of the KKK, this particular group, walks up to him, all imposing and oppressive, like, and he's like, you know, whatever you do to that cantaloupe, we're going to do to you. Okay? So already you have, and this, the guy giving the, like, talking in the interview didn't break it down this way, but to reassert my point, what you have now is a framework. You have a framework where it's like, okay, I am going to fight you. And I have now stepped so far into that framework that I am telling you that I'm going to give you an ultimatum. What you do to this thing, I will do to you. Now, of course, you normally cut open a cantaloupe and carve it out and eat it. I don't think they're cannibals, but like the implication is we will harm you in the way that you are planning to harm this cantaloupe, right? Now, you can either accept their framework and go, I'm going to set the cantaloupe down and not do anything to protect myself, right? You could also accept the framework by cutting into it defiantly and giving them the finger.
Come at me. Yeah.
Come at me, bro. Or you can start to chip away at that framework and use their own ultimatum against them, which is what this pastor did. The pastor looked at his cantaloupe, looked at the man, looked back at his cantaloupe, and then kissed it. And the guy giving the interview, or being interviewed, he said like half of the guys in the group cracked up. Like, it was
immediately disarmed.
Because it was funny. It was clever. Like, this man proved himself time and time again in every interaction that he's funny, he's clever, he's smart, he's compassionate. Like, he was always, like, the one thing he was saying about the pastor, he was always asking them how they were doing. He was always kind to them, like, even though they were terrible to him. And because that pastor was not accepting that framework that they were trying to assert, eventually, at least for this one man in particular, it chipped away at it so much that he couldn't justify his hatred towards him. Like, it was just not possible. He's like, I have no reason to hate this man. Right. Like, I've done everything in my power to get him to do something to justify my hatred, and he just won't do it. And he
obviously purely because he was a black man.
Right. And it
became ridiculous to this,
right,
I guess, former member of the KKK. It's like, this individual is stellar. You know, I can't hate a group of people based on such a ridiculous, insignificant thing,
right,
as the color of their skin.
Right.
Yeah.
And for me, like, the reason that interview always stuck with me, and that particular story always stuck with me, is because to me, especially in the context of what we're talking about, that's power. Like, everybody keeps talking about power and power structures and power dynamics. And you can have institutional power, you can have financial power, you can have influential power, but the reality is like the ability to change the way that somebody sees the world and the people in the world. That is the greatest power that you could possibly wield. Like, ever. There's no amount of money that can buy that. There's no amount of laws. I mean, if you're... Okay.
Media power.
Yeah, media power. Okay, fair.
But I think what you're saying is that you can exercise that power no matter how much money you have. If you have very limited amount of resources, limited amount of power in those senses, you can still have one-on-one interactions with people and change the game, even though it's a small interaction, or it's a small group of people, maybe just one person. Because amplify that by the amount of people in this movement who we see, who everyone's represented. Everyone hated that video, and everyone was like, yeah, fuck police brutality.
Yeah.
You know, fuck this incident. Fuck that this happens all the time, and fuck that these people don't get justice.
Right.
We have so many people who have moved into the margins of like, yeah, fuck this. Yeah. We are going to go out during a fucking pandemic and say what we need to say against this. But we're all looking for a leader. We're all looking for a direction. And, you know, catchy phrases like defund the police, they sound wonderful. They're easy to say. They don't mean defund the police in every instance.
Right.
But, you know, it's something to just get behind. It's lacking this compassion. It's lacking this be better than the police aspect, or be better than the masters. You know,
be better than your opponent.
Be better than the opponent.
Like, who is your opponent? What is your, because like it may not be a who. What is your opponent?
Yeah.
Because if your opponent is a concept, then like you have to find a concept that is more powerful and in direct opposition to that concept. You're not going to, like, and that's why I use the framework way of looking at it, is like you can't defeat this thing if you're using the framework, because the framework is the problem. Like, that's your enemy.
It's a very narrow viewpoint that you're stuck within.
Yeah.
Using that against itself, which
doesn't work.
It's not going to work because it's already there and it's already very powerful.
Right.
And you're just perpetuating it, so of course it's going to stay around.
And it's something in what I like about, like, the reason that I think that this can be effective, at least, you know, and it's my idea, so of course I like it. But the reason I think
that's why we're talking about it,
right?
Yeah.
The reason I think it could be effective is that isn't something for one side or another side to do. That's something for everybody to do. Mm-hmm. This is something that can be practiced and executed by everyone. It doesn't have to just be, you know, BLM or whoever on the anti-police brutality side of this issue. Like, this is something that, frankly, police should do.
Oh, for sure.
Like, there should be a way of addressing the framework that you're working under and where it comes from, because it's more nuanced. I genuinely believe that it's more nuanced than just a racial thing. Like, when it comes to why the police have this framework. Like, it's deeper than that. It's more complicated than that. And so, you know, you have to address where this framework comes from, why it happens, and how to dismantle it.
Attack the source.
Right. And what part everybody plays in that. Because I'll be the first one to, I mean, much to the chagrin of a lot of people, I'm sure, like, it is not like everyone is, it's not like the non-police side of this issue is blameless. Like, when we're talking about specific cases where it's clearly unjust, sure. But the reason that the framework exists doesn't just come out of a vacuum. Like, there is a history of hostile engagement between two sides of this issue. And that, whether it's true or not, or justified or whatever, like, the thing is that I've seen it. I trust me, I've seen it plenty within the Black community, is there is a hostile opinion of the police in general. I mean, it's in our music, it's in our movies, it's in our TV shows. Like, there is this anti-police sentiment, and that obviously, like, I understand why it happens. I understand where it came from, but you can't on one hand say that, like, you need to treat me like an individual while also reinforcing the framework that is damaging you and endangering your culture and you as an individual, your people. Mm-hmm. Like, you can't do those two things simultaneously of, like, fuck the police and also view me as an individual and stop judging me based off of this categorization. Mm-hmm. And so, like,
this is another example of using the framework,
right,
to define your hatred against a group.
Right. And so it's like, you can't carry these two sentiments at the same time. They're contradictory. And it won't work, because part of what's happening is when you go fuck the police now have this frame, like, you're now enforcing the framework into their head that you're against them, that they're against you.
And it's not, and I mean,
and
correct me if I'm wrong,
sure,
but, like, it's not about who started it, because maybe, you know, the music and the culture it's a reaction to,
I understand,
potentially who started it,
right?
Maybe some people on the police.
Sure.
I don't know. Like,
I mean, we have it's racist institutions,
exactly.
So it makes
it's coming
sense.
from a history, and we're hearing the echoes of it today.
Yeah,
and that's not what we're debating. We're debating the reactions.
Mm-hmm. Like, this is where we are now. How we got here is relevant to understanding, you know, how to prevent this from happening in the future and what to fix. But, like, we are here now. I can't.
So what do we do?
I can't undo what's been done.
We can't go back, and we wish we could.
Right.
But what do we do right now with all this built up energy that hundreds of years essentially of this terrible history that it's right at our doorstep? What do we do with it if we want to make change? Do we want to make change, first of all? And then if so, how do we accurately and efficiently make that change? And I think this is a good idea.
And I mean, does it mean that, have I had to swallow my own pride executing this idea? Definitely.
Oh my, that's basically what it requires.
Definitely. Is that fair? Hell no.
That's not fair.
But, like, that's the hard thing. That's what's difficult about this, is that, like, the solution to this is not one where you're not and the reason that The way I justify it to myself is I'm not doing this necessarily for me. I'm doing this for the people that come after me. Like, if I can swallow my pride and try and chip away at this idea, right, then I can, in my own, small way, influence the world for the better, so that way my kids, because I'm planning on having kids, or at least a kid, like, the next generation after me doesn't have to deal with this problem. Like, that's what this is about. This isn't about me anymore. Like, this is about what comes next. This is about who comes next, right?
Yeah.
And, you will, if the irony is that if you can swallow your, like, I feel like you can swallow your pride now, right? And we could enact this change as a generation, you would get, that would be repaid to you tenfold, because history will remember us as the generation that everyone else should be proud of. Because of the hard choices that we made, the hard decisions that we made to actually fight this issue. But that's just me.
Right. So this opinion is obviously flies in the face of a lot of what we're seeing right now, represented in the media, and represented in our Twitter feeds and all that, because it's less of a reaction and more of not even so much a plan, but just a way of being. Especially if you are against police brutality or against injustice in any form, not just black and white or any other racial issue, but pretty much anything that we see today where we notice a terrible miscarriage of justice.
Yeah.
How do you better the situation? It's how you react to it. And that's not to say that, you swallow your pride and you let it happen. No. This is absolutely against that. This is actually standing up for yourself and proving that you're better than this by through your actions. And, not just saying and enacting laws that basically further and further divide people on the issues. It's proving that you are worth more than what these people are giving you.
And, like, the reason that I feel like that works wonders and honestly I think makes everyone safer is because I have a track record 9 times out of 10 when I'm dealing with cops or even just straight up racist people. Like I've been called the N-word at a bar full of white people before, and even in that scenario I end the interaction on a first name basis with those people. And that requires a lot of self-control. That requires a lot of humility and fortitude. But the reason that I do it, like I said, again, it's not even just about the next generation in this case. It's about the next guy or woman or whoever.
It's about us. It's about everyone.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, like, if I can get on a first name, if that officer, we'll stay with the officer, if that officer can walk up to me, see me as an enemy, and I dismantle the framework well enough to where we're on a first name basis, he's having a good day, right? This wasn't a bad stop, all that good stuff. I have, in my own opinion, hopefully, made the next guy a little bit safer that cop interacts with, a little bit safer, because I've chipped away at that framework. Right? And so, like, that's the other thing. It's kind of like a pay it forward thing. Like, if I can keep reinforcing this idea that, we are the same. We're in the same box. We're in this together. I am not separate from you. The more that you can reinforce that idea, the more likely you don't have that negative interaction later on with people.
Right.
In general. And that can be used, right now we're talking about it in a racialized context, but like that can be used, like it's the same framework that homosexuality stuff back in today, and even for like more aggressively in like a few decades prior. But like all of these things, like it's just like it starts with you being able to put somebody in a different box from you in your head. So if you can get rid of that ability for someone, it's part of the reason why I do think that like films, and of course we would, it's part of the reason why I think films can be very powerful, and in literature, like art in general in that way, I feel like is at its best, or is at its greatest function, I suppose, to society when it teaches people how to see. Like there's it's one of those things where like I distinctly remember as a kid in like the 90s and early 2000s, like there was a few films that came out that were really good films that had like famous actors and actresses in them that were playing, because around that time homosexuality was a bit of a contentious topic. Like there was a debate happening
right
on the national stage in regards to that concept. And there were a ton of films that, like, part of that is due to people's inability, and people called it ignorance back then, and that's somewhat true. But it's literally that because they put homosexuals in a different box, they don't see them as them. They don't relate to them that way because they're separate.
They're foreign, alien, all that stuff.
Right.
Yeah. It's easy to separate yourself from them in that context.
But if you can, put Will Smith in a movie where he's homosexual, but you write it to where like it's impossible not to relate to him, because it's something that I genuinely feel as natural as it seems that humans find arbitrary ways to categorize people into other boxes. I also feel like it's equally natural for us to be compassionate towards other people. And compassionate not just towards other people, towards other things. Like Disney's a great example. Like we grew up as kids watching movies where it's like, I can relate to a lion just because it talks.
Well, and the story, and its history, and its struggles.
Right.
Yeah.
And so like you can take a famous actor that I like, and that's really what the trick was back then. Like you take a famous actor that I like and you cast them in an identity, and you write it well, you perform it well, you make them a person, you make them an identity second.
Yes. You make them an individual.
Right.
Who is a person that you would, I know a person like that. Or
right.
I'm like that. I relate to that.
Yeah.
And then, they happen to be gay, or they happen to be trans, or they happen to be black. And it's like, oh. And this is like, I feel like 99.9% of the people out there kind of fall in line with this idea.
Right.
There are people who will stick to their guns and be like, I'm going to be racist.
Yeah.
That's just my thing. And it's like, okay, well, we know to separate you, and you are actually a racist person. You can go in this corner and we will mock you, and you can do that. But most people will turn, even people who we consider racist now, we can turn them just, for the lunacy that their ideas are, and they'll realize it.
Right.
Like, oh, I was wrong.
Right. And it's not a ha gotcha. It's not a I told you so, or yeah, now you see it. It's like you need like one of the other things that I say often is that like justice without mercy is incomplete. Like there needs to be a merciful side to this. You need to like this is going to be messy. Because there are a lot of prejudices. There's a lot of just ignorance, lack of experience. Us having this framework that's been reinforced in all of our history books, that's in all of our, legacy as a country. Like this framework has been prevalent everywhere. And so like even people that don't see themselves, even people that are allies to these movements, they still work under this framework. And so this is going to be messy. They're going like if this were to somehow like become enacted as a philosophy of like we're trying to do this now, like this is messy, and people are going to mess up, and people are going to have spotted history with these subjects, and like there needs to be, as much as there needs to be justice, there needs to be mercy, because without that people don't coalesce into one thing. We don't become a unit, because we're too busy trying to punish everyone
for their past mistakes.
For lacking understanding, for lacking knowledge, for being victims of the framework of the society that we were all born in. Like,
yeah, there has to be room for growth and change and understanding of that change. Because a decision you made in the past to say a word that we don't care for now, or to be a person that, is abhorrent or whatever. If you've made considerable changes based on the lived experiences that you have now, and you're not that way anymore, there should be some level of, like you said, just, okay, we're good. We'll put you back into the fold. Let's get you up and running. We love you. We care about you. We want this community to grow. And that also invites other people in. Yeah. They see that and they're like, oh, that side, Liz.
That looks nice.
That looks nice. Yeah.
Right.
Because right now we're seeing this, obviously, cancel culture. And like, you said this 8 years ago? You're a piece of shit.
Right.
It's like, well, that was 8 years ago, and I've learned a lot since then. Does that count for something? No. You're a piece of shit. You always be a piece of shit. You're canceled. You can't have a platform anymore. And that, again, is a reaction. It's it's an emotional reaction to something that someone said, as if it was said to you just now.
Right.
You know, it's like, well, no. Just because it's written down on a Twitter feed from 8 years ago does not mean I said it right now. It doesn't mean I agree with it. It doesn't mean I'm willing to learn. I'm willing to change. There has to be some room for that. And if you're not willing to learn and change from that, then we know.
Right.
And
even then, I still think, attempt to work with them.
Sure.
Like,
because then we're going back to that idea of like, let me show you why you're wrong. Let me show you how it is to deal with whatever identity this is.
And to be completely honest, I feel like the reason I have that perspective is because of the actual religious side of my past.
Mm-hmm.
Because there were a lot of things that when I was drinking the Kool-Aid, so to speak, that I'm not proud of. I did things, I said things to people that I cared about and loved that were horrible because I was right. I was in this environment where what I knew and what I was taught and what I was conditioned to believe was right and true. And it was so obvious to me that it was right and true. Right? And because of that, I was enabled to do terrible things to people that didn't fit in that category. Like, not like horrific, like war crime sort of things, but like I was just a person that I don't like.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I was a person that I don't like. I was the exact problem that I am currently talking about. And, it's one of those things where if there is no mercy, then I have no reason to sit here.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if we can't achieve mercy, then I am incapable of changing who I am. Like, and
we know that's not true because you have changed.
Right.
From that person who was shaming people for leaving the religion or for, how dare you? How dare you? But you're not that person.
I mean, hey, I came from a religious community that was definitely anti-gay.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that started to break that down was the fact that, like, I went to a very diverse school in high school, and there was a definite gay guy in my class that, like, even though, like, he probably sensed that I had this aversion to him because of what I'd been taught, he pushed past it. He was just like, nah, like, we have these shared interests, like, we're these cool things, and like, I get that you're straight, like, I'm not trying to do nothing.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? Like, and we developed this, like, because I had no immediate justification in his behavior towards me to treat him poorly, to, like, have my prejudice that I was conditioned to believe reinforced. It started to whittle away at that. Like, that's just one example. It started to whittle away at that to where, like, I was like, look, like, when people in my religious community were, like, talking about the subject, I'm like, even I was kind of, like, starting to become fringe because I was like, well, maybe we should be more compassionate about how we view these people. Like, they're still people.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because I know this guy that I like.
Mm-hmm.
He just doesn't like the same, like, from a sexual standpoint, he doesn't like the same thing that I like. Like, that's the only difference between us. And he also, like, likes to color his hair, and I don't really do that because Dennis Rodman tried it and it just really doesn't work for me. Mm-hmm. But, like, it's one of these things where I'm just like, that I don't think he did that with the expressed, goal of, like, changing my ways, but because he didn't let my framework change the way he was going to behave.
Mm-hmm.
And change the fact that he was going to be kind and compassionate and just a good person to me. Like, it started to change the straight up brainwashing that I had been living under.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like,
and go ahead. It's the same brainwashing that I think we all experience. On your level, it was obviously a specific religion,
right.
But in general, I think as a society in America specifically, the brainwashing and the narrow window of view that we are allowed to see these issues through,
mm-hmm.
Whether it's police brutality against Black and brown people, or what have you, any sort of injustice that we're seeing, we react to those injustices with emotions,
mm-hmm.
and take that same framework and push it back.
Right.
Whereas we need to take a step back from that, readjust, and be like, how do I change that perception on their side,
mm-hmm.
through my actions, through my reactions, through all that.
Right. Like, what is your victory? And that's That's a big question.
Mm-hmm.
What is your victory condition? How do you win the fight that you started, or not started, but the fight that you're in now?
Right.
Like, what is your victory condition? Because I don't know what it is. Like, I can't like,
for this movement specifically?
for what's happening right now in the world. I don't know what the victory condition is.
Yeah.
Where do you win?
From what I can tell, it's, ending police brutality against black and brown people specifically in this instance. But yeah, from what I can tell, it's somewhat vague. There are some policies that they want to enacted that, again, that we believe are a little bit rushed or a little bit emotional. And again, using the same framework against itself, that as a like, oh, you hurt me, I'm going to hurt you back,
right,
kind of thing, as opposed to, wait a minute, how do we change this from every direction? Because
see, I always just play out the scenario because I'm a big history buff, so this is not the first time this sort of thing has happened conceptually. But no. What happens if you win? Like, using that framework, like, let's say that we now have a society that, like, we have, say, like, we get like reparations, we do all of these things, and now you have like all of these. You have black representation and black people in like these positions of power, but you're still using that framework, right?
Yep.
Like, you're inevitably, and I'm gonna call it like I see it because it's happened in history. You inevitably will become the same oppressive tyrant that you hated to start with, because you haven't changed anything. You've just shifted who has power, and you'll just restart the cycle. Like, the cycle's just gonna right.
Everything's still separate. Everything is still seen through that lens of separation and difference, even though there is not real difference there. It's just perceived difference that everyone agrees upon.
Right.
And then it gets perpetuated by the separation.
And I'm not saying we can't walk and chew gum at the same time, in the sense that, like, you can address some of the symptoms, like police brutality, like these systems, while also addressing the source. Like the intellectual, the psychological source of these things
that we all carry in ourselves. Right. Yep.
And to me, it's like, any cure that you can come up with that does not change the minds of people is ultimately ineffective. Mm-hmm. That's just how I see it.
Yeah. It's a lot to think about. And it's a lot of hard work. And
oh, hell yes.
Just being who I am, I do not see a lot of hope for humanity. But I think it's important to spread the word, because the direction that things are going in, even though we have a lot of energy and a lot of great people who want better things and obviously come from a very good place, the direction that things are going and we see is just not going to really help the situation at the end of the day. It's
not long term. You'll achieve some minor short term victories.
The thing is, they're victories, but are they successes?
Right.
Like, are they actually going to work to achieve any meaningful changes? I mean, changing the makeup of a Congress and changing the leadership of a board of some company,
or even starting some mini state inside of Seattle.
Yeah, these changes in I feel are just surface level. They don't actually change how these businesses work or how the government operates. No. The same crap is going to happen day after day, because, I mean, why is Amazon in support of Black Lives Matter? Because it doesn't threaten them. Right. They're happy to put a banner on their homepage. They're happy to change the makeup of their board.
It's all performative.
Because it's just it quells people down. It gets people, okay, cool, things are happening. But all you've done is change what people look like on the board, change what people look like in Congress or the Senate.
And reinforce this framework.
And you've reinforced the framework because nothing else they don't need to change anything else.
Right. Now the framework just works for you in this moment.
Maybe. It doesn't, though.
Well, I know. But it's like that's how they quell it. Because it feels like the framework is now working in your favor.
It feels like it. Right. Sure, I will give you that. Right. It feels nice. And I understand, like, it's good to see people who look like you represent on the screen and all that. I totally get that. But if nothing actually changes, like if the policies don't change, if the mindsets don't change, if there's no actual change being pushed through in these situations, if we're not holding government accountable, if we're not holding businesses accountable,
if we're not holding ourselves accountable,
nothing's going to change. Right. This is going to be the same story every 10 years or so, every 100 years or so, who knows?
Right.
We're going to get the same thing over and over again. And wonder why nothing's changed.
Right. We'll be sitting there doing the same old thing, and I'll be an old man talking to my grandkids like, we already did this.
We already did this. We already tried this. And that's the thing. It's like, I think I will speak for myself because
sure,
I 100% am behind this energy of like, something's got to change, and something's got to change right now.
Yeah.
Like, this is ridiculous that we're still dealing with this in this day and age. Because, I mean, something we kind of started talking about, but we didn't really get too into is our histories. We're mixed race people. And that has, in my mind, has given us kind of a unique perspective on things.
Oh, most definitely.
Because even though we're both half white and we're both half something else, black, brown, I guess, we were never 100% included in either of those two.
Not at all.
And being half white, to me, at least in my experiences, doesn't really mean anything anyway, because white people only accept people based on who they are generally. Like, not all white people are friends, kind of thing.
No.
Just like not all black people are friends.
They're actually much more likely to fight each other than anybody else.
Exactly. So, but that being said, we were never included in the minority group either.
No.
100%.
No.
Definitely included when it suits the purposes
when we toe
of the
line.
moment. When you toe the line.
When you toe the line, you're accepted.
And so because of that, we've had to develop coping mechanisms, essentially.
Yeah.
And it's not, and I think that's why we have a maybe unique ability to understand that individual comes first. I don't know if everyone. I've never lived as a fully brown man, or black or anything.
Neither have I.
So it's like, so I don't know if it's just me or how we see the world or whatever, more uniquely, but I get the sense that, because we've had to live as individuals and like, it's about what we offer and about who we or how we interact with the world as opposed to what we look like.
Right.
We've had that unique ability to see that is arguably the better way of going. We've constructed friend groups. We've constructed families based on how we interact with people and what we get responded back with.
I mean, to delve deeper into that, like, I feel like, at least for you and me, and I have noticed that there is kind of a split when it comes to mixed race people that I've met, where like either this is kind of the result of being mixed race in their lived experience, or like they will adopt or identify fully with their minority side, right? But for this, I feel like for me at least, the component, and I actually like, I brought this up in conversation years ago with a very good friend of mine who is it's not quite activism, but I'd call her a black visionary of sorts. And one of the things that, because there's like, in general, we agree on truth, justice, and being fair and equal-minded, but like there's a few lines where we kind of don't always agree on,
right?
And we're not seeing things eye to eye, and it comes down to it usually came down to like how I see myself versus how she sees herself, right? And how she was adopting the framework that we're talking about. Like, she would view herself as separate from white people specifically. And I know why. There's actually a lot of good reason for why that happens. But and she couldn't figure out like why I was refusing to adopt that mindset. And the thing that I arrived on is because it's a biological, like, one of the core things is it's a biological imperative for me to not see it that way. Because being somebody who is of two races, if those two sides don't get along, I don't exist anymore. Like, I don't happen if those two sides are fighting each other. And so it is almost, and I don't know how true this is, but I get a sense that some of this is a biological imperative on my part. It's a survival mechanism for me to be like, look, you guys need to start seeing that you're more similar than you are different. Like, you need to really know that and embody that and internalize that concept. Because if you don't, I die. Like, I don't happen. And there's no other way for us to exist in the way that we do. Like, we can't, like, technically, I guess you can, like, two mixed people can make another mix, but, like, it's not the same thing. It's a little different. Like,
Right.
And so, like, I feel like to some degree, I am, even from a just purely biological standpoint, I'm more prone to try and find that connection between people than I am to draw these lines between them. And part of that is also because of my lived experience, as you mentioned, like not really fitting squarely into either category.
Right.
Like if I'm neither of you, if I'm simultaneously both, we're Schrodinger's race. We're simultaneously both races and neither race.
And neither, yeah. So we are our own. We are forced to be more individualistic than maybe is expected of other people. Maybe, because I don't know 100%. I just the feeling that I get. But, yeah. So we construct communities and friendships based on individual qualities as opposed to identity identifiers. I don't know.
Right. Yeah.
And it's interesting how that works, but I think that's why we wanted to see this view more represented in public. And we never really we do enjoy talking about this, but we never thought we would ever really publicly talk about it.
Yeah.
Because
I'm actually surprised we're here.
It's it's a bit of a risk, I guess, to speak openly in this way, considering the political climate that's only gotten worse in the last few years. I know a couple of years ago, I would be against talking about this publicly, even though I totally support what we're saying.
Right. Yeah.
It's that's something that I also wanted to get into a little bit was how a lot of people don't feel in this current climate able to point out some of the things that they find not that they're 100% against things that are being perpetuated or even pushed politically, especially through this movement. They don't feel like they can even question stuff. They can talk openly about like for instance, speaking of there's a very popular sign that people are writing down on their during the protests, are specifically saying white silence is violence. And we have a friend who we spoke to recently who wanted to question that because in his view, he was like, wait a minute, there's a lot to take in right now. There's a lot going on, and I am 100% behind the movement in terms of pushing against police brutality against black and brown people specifically, but police brutality in general. But there's a lot to take in, and there's a lot in. He was coming from a place where, like, what is the best next step to take? I don't want to talk openly about this until I am 100% kind of more, I guess I'm in a better spot where I understand what I'm saying and I support it. I don't want to spout something without thinking about it because people are saying it. I want to spout something out and because I believe in it.
Right.
And potentially just perpetuate ideas that are just not helpful or
right.
So in his view, he was like, I'm not silent. I'm supporting it, but I'm silent in a way where I'm not going to just talk endlessly about it without really getting a handle on what I believe is the next best step.
Right.
So it was something that like kind of came clear to me. This is a person that I absolutely 100% respect and I appreciate their viewpoints, but he felt scared to speak openly about it, even with us.
Right.
When we were really good friends with him, he was very hesitant to bring it up with us, and I felt bad because it's like that's not how this should be. This should be very. This is the time to start speaking openly about ideas, letting them out into the light so that they can be dissected by everyone. Because we're talking about ideas right now and
that's where the mercy comes in.
Right, but the ideas should be dissected and thrown against the wall, see if they stick kind of thing, and debated. It shouldn't just be like, someone from BLM, for instance, proposes something and everyone must get behind it 100% without questioning it. That's a problem. That's an absolute problem. Even if that idea is perfect and 100% cool and like it'll work, and is going to be awesome and helpful, people should be able to debate and talk about it openly without risk of being canceled or thrown
ridiculed, ostracized,
thrown out of the thrown out of the fold. Like that's not how we that is not the right reaction. As this is the whole thing here is about how you react to things. This whole podcast. So
because to point it back to another, like, when it comes to, I can really relate a lot of this to my religious experience, but like, that's when you stop thinking. One thing that I know you've heard me say a lot is like, look, you can believe what you want to believe. You can have a frame of mind that you want to have if it's not causing you to hurt anybody. Like, I'm not anti-religion in the sense that, like, I want to convert everybody to no longer believe it. I don't care. Right. Where I take issue is when your beliefs, whatever they are, religious, political, don't care. When your beliefs cause you to stop thinking.
Thinking critically.
Right. Thinking critically. Like, you're not thinking about what you're saying. You're not thinking about what you're doing.
You're just going along with the ride.
Right.
Yep.
And so having this gatekeeping, so to speak, in these movements where it's like, this is the idea. This is what you repeat. Say this now. Like, and it can't be questioned. You can't have a discussion about it. You can't work through the ideas. No, that's dangerous.
That is dangerous.
Like, that is the beginning of a cult mindset, and I think in my opinion.
That's kind of what started this off for me. In wanting to have this conversation is, the inability to question, the inability to voice concern, the inability to bring up other ideas if you're not black. Or, it's...
Yeah, we have a privilege when it comes to this conversation. We do.
Congratulations. You got one. No, but that's not how we should look at it.
Right.
It's obviously this specific issue of police brutality is felt by the black and brown community more so statistically, I guess, in terms of population. But that isn't to say that that isn't to say that people can't empathize and have ideas and bring up solutions.
And that was another thing he said in that conversation where he's like, I feel like I can't understand their experience. And I'm like, of course you can. This is the entire, like, we're storytellers by trade. I'm like, this is the entire point of storytelling. Like, storytelling doesn't function as a device if you're incapable of understanding and relating to someone who isn't you.
I mean, the whole reason why he attended a protest,
yeah,
and the whole reason he went there is obviously because he empathized with the ideas. So he doesn't have the lived experience,
right?
Which
that's fine.
Not everyone's going to have that experience.
No one is going to have my lived experience,
right? But he can empathize with the ideas, and he can watch a video and understand what the hell is going on. So. That's all I had to say about that.
And to me, like, I think that's just a emphasis on the sad state of the lack of conversation, really, that is happening between people who are trying to engage with these ideas, because they actually, like, this, and to me, this is the most dangerous form of the framework that I keep bringing up, is he, well-meaning, trying to be supportive, believed, until we deconstructed it in that conversation, believed that he couldn't understand any part of the black experience because he wasn't black. And I'm kind of like, that, then how do you support them? You can't support, like, you cannot effectively support someone that you can't relate to, that you can't understand. Like, how does that work?
Yeah, he clearly does relate to it.
Right. But he was conditioned to believe that he didn't because of how the rhetoric of all of these things go.
And his opinion is invalid.
Right.
Yeah, and that's just simply not true. And I would vehemently fight against that notion because, again, it's a reaction. It's like, I felt this pain, I felt this suffering. My group feels this pain, my group feels this suffering. You do not. But if you want to help me be bodies, do what we say because we... But
be separate from me.
But be separate. You will never understand who I am, what I am, but
allow me to have power over you. Say what I want you to say.
And that's what I want to steer away from. We're all in this together. We all support this idea of this movement, at least, to change the way things are.
Things need to change.
Things definitely need to change.
That is obvious.
But using power dynamics, using the framework against itself, which won't work, just isn't the smart way to go. And being reactionary, being emotional, obviously use you So you can't help how you're going to react to
Right.
something internally, but you can
We're
choose how
artists.
you can react, what you do with that motion.
Right.
You can choose how you move forward. And I think that's something that I really wanted to, I guess, express with you.
Just
together,
put this out there in the world. See,
you know.
and this is not like to embody the philosophy, so to speak. It's like I'm not the part of the reason that I agreed with you that we should probably do this in a public fashion to some degree was that we've been talking with each other and with our circle of friends, and I kind of admitted it sounds good to the people that I talk to when I put forth this idea and really break it down. And I'm like, is this confirmation bias? Is this like a self-selecting sample size? Is there a hole in this idea? I actually want to, we're putting this out there because, it's not, one, we think we're onto something, but two, we also want people to challenge it. We want people to engage with it.
I
We want to,
100% agree.
we want to refine this.
Mm-hmm. And not necessarily in the comment section or on Facebook. I want to actually talk to people.
Oh, for sure. Yes, I would love to have...
Because that's really how you enact change or enact debates. And change of mindset is through face-to-face interaction. I mean, that's what we're designed for as humans.
Right.
The comment section on any social media platform is not a place where you're going to change hearts and minds.
No.
At all. I mean, it's just blatantly obvious. But,
right.
But yes, I mean, feel free to challenge these ideas in a setting that actually, would be good for that.
I would even say you can back off of this, but I would say that, if this reaches somebody who, is, been heavily involved in civil rights work or is a member, a long-standing member of the BLM or whatever, anybody who, or even on the police side, I'm more than happy to talk to, a police officer, people that see things from a different, if this reaches somebody who really wants to sit down and have a real conversation about these ideas, about how to address these issues and potentially challenge what we've been talking about, I'd be more than happy to, have us sit down, do this similar format and just talk it through, see what happens, see what shakes loose. I am open to that.
I mean,
completely.
That's the only way we're ever going to learn about other perspectives and build on our ideas, or evolve them even. We'll never know what's going to we have our own perspective, and that's, part of the reason why we did this, again, is because we didn't see it represented, and we wanted to add some more, I guess...
Add our perspective to this conversation.
Another perspective
that's really what it
we
boils
feel
down
is
to.
valid as well. So yeah, challenge perspective, have more conversations in person with people who have differing views. I think next time we want to do something like this, I think we should talk to somebody who is of an opposing side potentially to these views. Or maybe they just feel like we don't understand something. I'd love to talk with somebody.
Give me more perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. More perspective is needed in the world, I think. And understanding. So that's really all I got for this one.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know what we're going to do with it, but we'll put it on somewhere. And
so if you've made it this far, thanks.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks for engaging with this with this conversation, listening to what we have to say.
Yeah,
and,
I know it's rambly,
but
we're like I said, we never done this before. We've had ideas to talk about this stuff. We had ideas to do a show a couple of years ago where we would get into ideas. We don't even have a name for this thing.
Nope. I have no idea what we're going to call this, so good luck with that.
Yeah,
Internet.
We'll figure it out. But again, I think next time we want to do something like this, if we feel like it, we should talk to some people who
for sure
have other ideas, and have a delightful conversation. Hopefully that's...
Yeah, and I mean,
valid.
there's emotion, so I'm cool with there being a little emotion, but understanding that the goal here is to arrive at solutions.
Yeah, I think we're all on the same team. I think we all want the same things. It's just how we get there.
Right.
And I think that's a good note to end on.
Yeah. Cool. So thanks for listening, watching, whatever.
Yeah. Thank you.
But we'll see
End
you
of
later.
broadcast.